How did Doug go from doing this to this?
I wanted to thank you, Doug. You saved the whole ceremony.
Before we get started, let's meet the main characters. For starters, we have Doug, who's just as scared of growing up as he is of being bald. Newsflash, you already are. And that's okay. Next, we have Doug's best friend Skeeter, short for Mosquito. Not sure what his parents were thinking when giving him that name, but at least he's making the best of it. Some more familiar faces are Patti, Doug's love interest throughout the series, BB, the richest and most annoying girl in school, and Roger, the town bully. And while we'll meet some more interesting characters as we delve, let's get started with Doug. Our first episode, Doug Can't Dance, begins with Doug benignly semi-confident in his Halloween costume, even though it looks like, well, that. It doesn't take Doug's bubble long to be popped as Roger, the school bully and Doug's main antagonist throughout the show, makes it clear that Doug is in way over his head. After being bullied by Roger about not only Doug's Halloween costume but also his dancing skills, Doug is feeling much less confident. His original plan was to ask his crush Patti to dance, but now he's not even sure that he'll be attending. Doug approaches his best friend Skeeter, who gives Doug some dance lessons. While Skeeter gets completely twisted, Doug does learn some epic dance moves, renewing his confidence in the dance. Once there, he's greeted by Patti, who's the only person in the entire episode to know what Doug's costume is, much less compliment it. Roger tries to ruin Doug's night, but fails when he slips and falls, making a fool of himself instead. Roger does end up falling onto Doug though, hurting Doug's leg in the process. While students start to notice Doug and begin making fun along with Roger, Patti saves the day by pretending that Doug was just doing a new dance that nobody has seen before. The second episode, Doug Bags a Neemtoad, is actually considered to be the beginning of Doug's story as it references how his family got to Bluffington. The episode begins with Doug and his family moving into Bluffington. Upon moving into their new household, Doug's father, Mr. Funny, gives Doug some money to find the family some burgers for a hard day's work. Upon leaving the house, Doug meets some citizens of the town and hears of Honk Burger, which is where he decides to go for his family's food. During his conversation, he also learns of Stinson's Pond, which houses the mythical legend of the town's nematodes that I'm sure Doug will search for later. Doug makes his way over to Honk Burger, where his anxiety runs rampant. He's unable to order and feels like a fool. This is when he meets his soon-to-be best friend Skeeter. He orders for Doug and introduces himself and the buddies he was hanging out with at the burger joint. When Doug's order is ready and he heads to grab said order, he catches a glimpse of the prettiest girl he's ever seen in his whole life, Patti, who eventually will be his friend and longtime crush. Because he is distracted from his task at hand, he ends up slipping on a stray ketchup packet and landing in front of Roger. Shudders. Roger, taking advantage of the new kid, insists that if Doug finds a neemtoad at the pond, then he will instantly be one of the most popular kids at school. This intrigues Doug, who wouldn't want to be popular at their new school. Doug meets Roger and his posse in the woods, where Roger repeatedly insists that Doug do embarrassing tasks in order to catch a neemtoad. Doug slowly catches on after hearing Doug and his friends laughing at him, and he gets upset. His anger is short-lived, however, when Porkchop, Doug's loyal dog, comes out of the brush covered in mud. Roger and his friends are convinced it's a real nematode, even though they previously had no knowledge of them even existing. Doug leaves the forest with Porkchop, excited to tell his new friends of his adventure of the day, while Roger stays all night to try and catch his own nematode. Back at the burger joint, Doug ends up slipping on yet another ketchup packet and falls under none other than the goddess he had laid his eyes on previously. He apologizes profusely to Patti, but she easily forgives him, introducing herself and building their new friendship. A valuable life lesson is learned in Doug's dog date. It all begins when Doug notices that Porkchop has been distant lately. He takes Porkchop to the local vet to see their opinion, but there doesn't seem to be anything actually wrong with him. In an effort to calm Doug's nerves, the vet tells Doug that maybe he should be spying on Porkchop to get down to the hidden issue. Doug takes their advice and notices that Porkchop has fallen hard for a poodle across the way. Doug is incredibly distraught by this because Porkchop seems to prioritize his new relationship over their long-term friendship, which is deeply saddening. However, later that day when Doug is complaining to Skeeter about his dilemma, he gets sidetracked by Patti, running off with her instead of continuing to play with Skeeter. He eventually makes his way back to his friend, apologizing for leaving him and emphasizing the spell that girls have on him. Skeeter easily forgives his friend, as he knows that no matter what girl is in the picture, they will always be best buds. This makes Doug realize that he needs to have the same mentality as his friend. He rushes home to see if Porkchop is there, only to find his canine companion having some doggy blues. Apparently, the poodle broke up with him. Doug reassures his friend that no matter what happens, they will always be best friends, ending the episode on a good life lesson learned. We get a close-up of Doug's older sister Judy in this next episode, Doug Can't Dig It. The episode consists of Doug dreading Judy's performance, insisting that she shouldn't perform because it's going to embarrass him. Because of Doug's anxiety, he doesn't feel as though he can associate with anything that's going to embarrass him. Judy insists that her performance will be great and that Doug has nothing to worry about, but all Doug can think of is when the two of them were in a play together. Doug played the toothbrush and Judy played the plaque. Yeah, that happened. Judy's spotlight ends up going swimmingly. Everyone congratulates her, and Doug in the end really didn't have anything to worry about. The episode concludes with Doug also congratulating Judy, taking a picture with her after her successes. Doug on the wild side begins with Doug's grandma, Opal, coming to the Funnies family. She gifts Doug a white leather jacket and offers him a ride around town on her motorcycle. Doug is a bit shy about the jacket, promising that he'll wear it whenever it's a bit colder outside. However, he does join her for the ride. Opal, Doug, and Porkchop head off on their first journey. Opal introduces Doug to sushi for the first time, which he thoroughly enjoys regardless of the idea of it being raw fish. Opal then cruises around town with Doug, and they run into Patti at the library. Grandma Opal tells Doug that he should definitely go up to Patti and tell her that she looks nice today, which Doug really doesn't want to do. After some contemplation, he does as she says, with Patti happy and blushing as Doug and his grandmother ride back home. The episode ends with Opal leaving the Funnies household and Doug, fully influenced, riding his bike with Porkchop and imagining that Opal is still there, allowing him to ride on her motorcycle. Unfortunately, this episode begins with Doug saying goodbye. Skeeter approaches Doug with the unfortunate news that he will be moving out of Bluffington with his family. The two are incredibly distraught by this news and immediately begin contemplating how they can keep him from moving away. Together, they decide that Skeeter will just live with Doug and hide out at his house. Shortly after committing to their decision, Skeeter decides that he'd like to go to their favorite burger joint. In fear that somebody would recognize them, they decide to dress Skeeter up in a disguise. That's incredibly easy to see through. At the burger joint, Skeeter's father finds Doug, emphasizing to him that Skeeter's mother is worried sick about Skeeter and that they really need him to return home. Taking his words to heart, Doug decides to tell Skeeter that he should probably be heading home, much to the sadness of both of the boys. Skeeter heads home, with both of them sadly saying goodbye. The next morning, Doug goes off to Skeeter's house to say his official last goodbye, only to find Skeeter's family car already driving off. Doug turns around to head home, but finds that Skeeter is still at his house. Skeeter explains to Doug that he just misunderstood what his parents were telling him. Apparently, they were never going to move out of Bluffington, they were just moving Skeeter's bedroom into the basement. The episode ends with the two boys vowing to do all of the fun things with each other as often as they can, in fear that one day, one of them might actually have to move away from the other for real. Season 2 begins with Doug Takes the Case. The episode starts off with us learning that someone in Doug's class stole BB's radio. BB is the rich, popular girl in school, and after she shared her radio during show and tell, it went missing. BB's father is distraught, yelling at the class and getting the teacher to give them all detention if nobody confesses. Patti emphasizes that she can't miss her sports practice after class, and with Doug's lady in trouble, he immediately wants to jump on the case. At first, Doug naturally suspects Roger, but Skeeter explains to him that Roger was already in detention when it was stolen, so there's no way that it could have been him. Doug then questions BB, who mentions a boy named Boomer, who she thinks might be a suspect. Upon investigating Boomer, Doug ends up noticing his beloved Skeeter having the radio. Doug contemplates whether he should turn his friend in, but inevitably doesn't. At the end of class, their classroom teacher suggests that the kid who stole the radio should go up to her desk and return it while the lights are off so that nobody knows who truly did it. This relieves Doug as he expects his friend to return the radio, but Skeeter doesn't move. Doug, frustrated, takes the radio himself to return it, only for Roger to turn the lights on in the middle of him walking to the desk. Before Doug can get into actual trouble, BB begins crying and tells the truth. She had accidentally dropped the radio, which broke it, and she had given it to Skeeter in an attempt to fix it. In hopes of not getting in trouble at home, she told her father that somebody stole it so she would have more time to figure out how to fix it. The episode ends with all of the students being allowed to leave. Thank God, never thought Patti would stop crying. Skeeter apologizes to Doug for not telling him the truth, as he had promised BB not to tell a single soul. Doug also apologizes to Skeeter for even suspecting him in the first place. Doug is confused when he continues to receive secret admirer letters inside of his locker. He tells Skeeter about them and the two get to work trying to figure out who the culprit is. After, Doug contemplates multiple girls that it could be, one including his favorite little lady, Patti of course. However, all of his dreams are crushed when he sees none other than BB placing them inside of his locker. Doug isn't interested in her, so he and Skeeter come up with some ideas to stray her away, such as dressing up like Roger, and even a raccoon. Doug ends up feeling bad for not just telling BB that he's not interested, so towards the end of the episode, he mans up and tells her like it is. BB is shocked and begins to cry. None of the letters she put in Doug's locker was intended for him. She was trying to give them to Skeeter. She kisses Doug on the cheek, grateful to him as she now knows that she wasn't being ignored by the person she truly admires. Doug's worst nightmare begins with something truly from the scariest of horror movies. Roger has fallen hard for Judy, and Doug doesn't know what to do about it. It starts with Roger showing up to Doug's house, acting like they're friends, which is a scary event within itself. Doug prompts Roger to tell him what's actually going on, only to learn that Roger has fallen for Doug's older sister, Judy. In hopes to sabotage Roger and potentially embarrass him at school, Doug emphasizes to Roger the importance of looking like the Shakespearean characters of the shows that Judy loves to watch. He takes this information to heart, showing up to school the next day with a completely new vibe and even talking in a strange accent. Roger even attempts to leave a note for Judy in her bedroom window, but he was at the wrong house. Annoyed, Doug agrees to deliver his message to Judy himself. Surprised, Judy decides to meet Roger at the burger joint, but their date doesn't last long. Skeeter and Doug arrive at the restaurant in hopes to break the two up, only to find that their job was already done for them. The episode ends with Roger explaining to Doug that he no longer has feelings for Judy, as she appears to be even stranger than Doug himself, and Roger could never be associated with something like that. Says the one that looks like that. Alright. A somewhat heart-touching episode, Doug Saves Roger, begins with a new kid in town arriving in their class, Percy. Percy is massive, much larger than Roger and meaner too. Before Roger realizes that his opponent is in a different weight class than him, he prepares to throw water balloons and humiliate him. When Percy goes to fulfill his welcoming promise, his balloon is snatched out of his hand. Percy goes in on Robert to an extent that no student has ever endured at their school. At first, Doug is happy that Roger seems to be getting the payback that he deserves, but slowly he begins to feel sorry for Roger as Percy is relentless, going after Roger every single day, planning specific times to get him, and being somewhat physically violent. At one point, Doug helps Roger hide from Percy and attempts to reason with him as to why not to go after Roger. While his plan somewhat worked, Percy just decides to go after Doug instead. Overhearing what Percy plans for Doug, Roger does the right thing and finally tells the teacher of their torment. Roger and the teacher kick Percy out of the school, with Roger proudly announcing that he's the only one that is allowed to bully Doug. The episode ends with Doug and Roger trading off and on their I'm a Doofus poster. Porkchop is excited when he sees an ad for the pet capades. He attempts to tell Doug that he'd like to participate, however, Doug completely ignores him. Later that day, Doug gets threatened by Roger, who is blatantly telling Doug that him and his cat Stinky are much better than Doug and his dog Porkchop. He also proudly proclaims that he plans on entering Stinky in the upcoming pet capades, which prompts Doug to enter in the competition as well. Now knowing that Doug is battling against Roger, he takes the situation more seriously, making him and Porkchop practice their show all night in order to perfect it. On the day of the show, Porkchop is incredibly distraught. He doesn't feel that it's fair that Doug took something he was excited to do by himself and turn it around and make it about something completely different. Porkchop refuses to go on stage because of this. After learning of how his best friend is feeling, Doug decides to sit out the competition and let Porkchop have his time to shine. This greatly pleases Porkchop, who goes on stage and has the time of his life, even offering Doug to come up and perform with him. Doug happily agrees and the two dance the night away. And if you're curious, Roger's performance was less than subpar, with him performing and Stinky just sitting there. Awkward. This next episode, Doug Flies a Kite, is one of the main episodes that features Doug's father, Phil. It begins with Doug finding his father, Phil, looking through their attic. It's here that Phil pulls out an old kite, Funny Kite 5. He offers that he and Doug build their own kite together in order to fly later at the air show. Doug is excited to hang out and build with his father, but is incredibly disappointed by Phil's designs. Nothing about the kite is fun, it's just a regular kite. Phil won't listen to Doug's qualms, claiming that a boring kite flies just right, and other strange riddles that he continues to talk about in the whole episode. Doug doesn't complain further, but after Doug hears all of his friends' tales about their cool kites, Doug decides to go into the garage that night to make improvements to the kite, but none of these cool attachments work. They actually prohibit the kite from being able to fly. Eventually, Phil unwraps the kite, much to Doug's horror. Phil hears Doug out and calmly removes some of the attachments that Doug had it on, reassuring Doug that those were the only reason the kite wasn't working. And with that, Phil launches their kite. Doug is absolutely amazed at the level of maneuvers the kite is capable of, easily beating every other kite in the air show. Phil explains to Doug that their kite is a fighting kite, the simplest design, but also the kite that is able to do the most complicated tricks. The episode ends with Doug having a newfound respect and trust in his father, who ended up being right all along about their kite design. Doug and Skeeter decide to create their very own garage band in this next episode. The two are determined and strike gold when BB tells the two that she got her cousin to ask the guy at the record store to listen to the boys' tape. Apparently, they were a hit and BB wants to join in on their little band. In hopes to create a real showstopper, Doug goes around town asking other kids to do other tasks in regards to their performances, such as lighting and special effects. It turns out that every kid in town has no interest in doing those intricate tasks and would rather play the drums or guitars instead. So all these kids are basically taking up Doug's offer while also joining the band, making their band grow larger and also more chaotic in the process. It gets to an unbelievable point to where Doug doesn't even have fun in the band anymore, and even after the small performance, apparently the record guy didn't even like Doug specifically, since Doug likes to play the banjo and that isn't rock and roll enough. Doug happily leaves the band as he didn't even want to be in it anymore. BB takes over, but the band ends up breaking apart after they were all chased out of their last gig due to them being absolutely horrible performers. Doug miraculously scores a field goal while practicing with Skeeter, which causes enough commotion for the football coach to take notice. He instantly puts Doug on the football team as the kicker, emphasizing that Doug's golden toe will be their ticket to success since they've never scored a single point against Blossberg, their upcoming opponent. At first, Doug is confident in his abilities but is quickly humbled by Skeeter, who's convinced that Doug's kick was a fluke. In a hope to be somewhat prepared, Doug begins reading a kicker book from the library, but he is still extremely nervous for what's about to come. At the football game, all bets seem to be off whenever the team notices that Percy, their past bully, is on the opposing team. Doug still tries his best, but when it's time for him to kick, he ends up kicking off his shoe. making that through the goalpost instead. Later on in the game, all hope seems to be lost as Bluffington has 0 points and Blossburg has like 57. After several of Bluffington's players get injured, they're almost forced to forfeit, but are saved when Doug volunteers to play for them. Once in the game, Doug passes wonderfully and the team is finally able to get their first ever points against Blossburg. The episode ends with their coach incredibly proud of the boys, ensuring that Doug will be in the next game as well, much to his dismay. Doug's birthday present begins with Doug witnessing BB's last birthday present, a speedboat. Is that what normal kids are getting these days? I mean, that is just insane. Anyways, Phil feels bad as he isn't able to provide such outlandish gifts for his own family the way that BB's father is able to contribute to his own. Because of this, Phil becomes a bit depressed. In hopes of making his family more money, he decides to open his own photography business, quitting his other job and assuming that the new business will make the family much more money. However, since it's a one-man show, Phil wasn't able to make much money opening, and he has to work all day and all night since he doesn't have any employees. Doug starts to miss his father and visits him at his shop only to find him completely exhausted and literally falling asleep against the walls. At Doug's birthday party, he emphasizes to his father that no amount of money can buy you a great dad and that he misses Phil greatly. The two reconcile and Phil learns a valuable lesson about finances. Some things are just more expensive than any amount of money. And that even though the Funnies might not be the most financially stable in town, they surely are the richest. Doug finds out in Doug's brainy buddy that Skeeter is actually the smartest kid in Bluffington. Skeeter scored a perfect score on their intelligence test and got admitted into the local college because of it. Doug is confused as to how Skeeter is secretly a genius and is angry at Skeeter for all the attention he's getting because of it. Doug even throws a small tantrum when Skeeter tells him about his college offer. Upon returning home, Doug begins getting rid of all of his and Skeeter's items, convinced that once his friends go to college, he will suddenly not want to be friends with Doug anymore. Before he can finish his cleaning job, Skeeter shows up at his house, explaining that he won't be attending the college due to the other kids smoking. The episode ends with Doug having his best friend back and learning that even when you're super envious of your friends, you need to stay supportive of them. Doug's Christmas story begins with tragedy striking the town of Bluffington. Porkchop has bitten BB, and knowing that snobby little girl, this whole town's about to hear about it. The episode begins with BB about to fall into an icy lake. Porkchop notices the impending danger and does his best to save her. He attempts to grab onto her clothes and bites her leg instead. BB immediately begins sobbing, prompting the rest of the children to come comfort her. Eventually, BB's parents find out about what happened and send their lawyers after the Funnies. Insisting that he must pay for his crimes, they lock him up at the pound and await the trial that will be taking place. At said trial, Doug tries his best to free his friend, but nothing they do seems to work. The dog psychologist is also stupid, not listening to anything that Porkchop tries to play out and continuously insists that Porkchop is a killer dog. When all else fails, Doug begs the judge to let Porkchop attempt to explain the situation that occurred, which includes everybody that's a part of the trial traveling to the crime scene. It's here that BB begins reenacting what she was doing before the attack, only to fall through the ice floor below her. Porkchop rips free from his restraints and saves BB, just as he was trying to do in the very beginning. The episode ends with the entire city of Bluffington regarding Porkchop as the town's savior, launching off everybody's Christmas on a positive note. Season 5, Episode 1 marks the first episode of the Disney version of this Nickelodeon classic. After Nickelodeon had ended the show, Disney picked it right back up, but not without changing some core details of the show. The episode begins with Doug highlighting some of these changes, like a new middle school being built that they're supposed to go to next year. Doug's birthday is coming up and he's excited to spread his invitations throughout the town, but he begins to get weirded out when everybody that he knows keeps on changing. Connie's lost a bunch of weight, to the point where Doug can't even recognize her. Skeeter got a growth spurt that's for some reason only in his arms. The Hunger Burger got changed into a fancy French restaurant, and the thing that finally breaks Doug for real is finding out that Roger is suddenly rich. Roger explains to Doug and their other classmates that BB's father bought the land from his mother in order to build their school in that location, resulting in his family now having a lot of money in comparison to what they used to have. Doug has enough of Roger's explanation and decides to go on a walk to make himself feel better, only to find out that his favorite band is breaking up. He calls Skeeter and Patti over for them to mourn together, only to get a huge bomb dropped again. Patti is no longer going to be going to their school. In the mornings, as her father would like to homeschool her until the afternoon, this makes Doug's brain explode. Doug goes home and gets reprimanded by his mother again to get his hair cut, which makes Doug anxious and annoyed. Judy notices this time though, and lectures Doug on why he never wants to cut his hair. She explains that Doug is just terrified of change and that he needs to get over it. Humans change, rocks don't, and nobody wants to be a rock. Listening to his sister, Doug finally goes to get his hair cut. He then has his birthday party, even though he originally wanted to cancel it due to him being uncomfortable with the new dynamics throughout the town. The episode ends with one last big change. But thankfully, Doug has been practicing all day on how to deal with those types of things. The Funnies bring Doug, Judy, and Porkchop into the living room to explain to them that they're going to be having another baby. Doug's heart is hurting. In this next episode, Doug's Patty Beef. Patty shows interest in the Junior Daughters, the Founding Mothers and Fathers Where No Boys Are Allowed club. This confuses Doug as she's never mentioned the club before. After their conversation, Doug notices Patti around less and less, and she's not talking to him at all. And it's not that Patti doesn't want to speak with him, it's that she's not allowed to. During initiation week, club members are only allowed to talk to other club members with no exceptions, not even to tell other people why they aren't speaking to them. Patti semi-ignores this rule, having Doug meet her after dark to tell him what's going on so that he can stop worrying about why she isn't talking to him. Doug is even more confused by this, deciding along with Skeeter that the only way to understand the club is to become members. In order to do this, they both dress up as women, which for some reason works easily. They have tea with BB and the other 2 girl members. It's here that they learn that the club members actually want to help the environment and have nice cute girl time together. This is a relief since Doug assumed they were using their evil brainwashing abilities on Patti to turn her into a snob like them. Patti enters the room and immediately notices that Doug and Skeeter are dressed up as women, and she calls them out in front of all the other members. Doug apologizes to Patti, explaining that he wanted to make sure the club was a safe space and that he wanted to make sure the girls in the club were being nice. He tells Patti that while they may have ragged on the club while growing up, he wouldn't mind if she chose to be a permanent member as long as she agrees to continue to be friends with him and Skeeter as well. This is when Patti explains that she was late to the meeting because she's decided that the club life just isn't for her. There are too many activities she misses doing, such as dirt biking. The girls in the club respect Patti now though, and invite her and the boys to play tennis with them regardless of the situation that just occurred. Doug gets sick and tired of Roger's bullying for the last time. Instead of rolling over and letting him continuously bully him, Doug decides to come up with some comebacks, with the help of a mean-spirited comedian on the side. At first, it worked. Roger is humiliated in public a couple of times. All of his goons follow around Doug instead, and Doug no longer gets bullied every single day. But things get tricky when Doug begins insulting his friends instead. In hopes to continue to make his new gang laugh, he disregards his friends' feelings and makes fun of them too, just as harshly as everybody else does. After realizing what he's been doing is wrong, he decides to go out for some ice cream with Patti and Skeeter, apologizing for his actions and explaining the situation that occurred. His friends forgive him, ultimately happy to have their best friend back. An interesting concept happens in this next episode, The Big Switch. Doug and Patti want to trade lives, BB wants to switch with Skeeter, and Roger wants to switch with Chalky, the jock in town. Each individual is convinced that the other's life is much easier than the other, and are set to prove this by living a weekend in each other's shoes. At first, all of them have a better time in their switched versions of themselves, but quickly learn that their friends' lives aren't all as choked up as they thought they were. Doug's mother needs more help than Patti could have ever imagined. Chalky's father makes Roger work out more than he has in his entire life. Roger's life is more lonely than Chalky would ever enjoy. BB doesn't like watching over Skeeter's family, while Skeeter doesn't like the expectations put on him in BB's home. And Doug is tired of Patti's father trying to teach him a plethora of history lessons. The episode ends with the kids literally running back to their original homes, much more grateful for the lives that they've originally been given. Doug's youngest sibling is on the way, and they're getting in the way of Doug's Christmas. The episode starts off with Doug getting excited for his big day, opening presents on Christmas. Phil has other plans though, pulling Doug to the side and having the birds and the bees talk with him. Shockingly for Phil, Doug has already had the sex talk at school, explaining more things about the subject than even Phil knew. Talk about father-son bonding time, am I right? Anyways, after their big talk, Phil tells Doug that because of the baby on the way, there will be a significantly less amount of presents this year from Santa, as they will be too busy getting ready for the baby. Doug is understanding and bluffs to his father, saying that the list he made is for baby names, not Christmas presents. Judy ruins this though by yelling about how Doug wants to name the baby things like dirt bike. Doug is incredibly upset about nobody seeming to be in the true holiday spirit, so he and Porkchop hide out in his room to make their own little Christmas celebration. The morning of Christmas, Doug goes downstairs expecting a celebration, only to find that nobody is home. Doug feels sad and lonely when he suddenly gets a phone call from his father, who is incredibly relieved to hear Doug's voice on the other side of the phone. Apparently, the funny family had driven in a panic to the hospital, because Theda, Doug's mother, unexpectedly was going into labor. Doug rushes to the hospital to greet his baby sister, who his parents decided to name Cleopatra Dirtbike, after the names that Doug and Judy had written on the list from earlier in the episode. The episode ends with a large Christmas celebration being held at the Funny's house, with Doug getting one of the best gifts ever, a heartwarming scarf that Patti knitted for him, even though she's known to hate knitting. Our next episode, Doug's Hairy Situation, highlights Doug's hair, or lack thereof. The episode begins with Doug's classmates slowly changing, with Patti getting her first pimple, BB getting a nose job, and Roger getting his first facial hair, a singular hair follicle. Some may even think it's lint. Doug is intrigued by all of the changes that are happening and begins contemplating his own appearance. At first, he's proud of himself for not having any major negative thoughts about himself, but this quickly changes when he starts thinking about his hair. He desperately doesn't want to be bald and is even more embarrassed when he thinks about the state of his hair when the new water park opens up at the end of the week. To try and make himself feel better, he begins asking his parents about their hair, feeling his father's head to ensure that he isn't going bald. This is when Judy conveniently points out that while their dad might have a lot of hair, their mother's brothers were not as fortunate. This freaks Doug out, like bad. He goes on a spiral, trying everything and anything in town that might make him grow more hair or prevent his few strands that he does have from falling out, but nothing works. Defeated, Doug decides not to go to the water park with his friends out of embarrassment. He heads to a movie instead to get his mind off things. The superhero in the movie's secret power, though, was that he was bald. This empowers Doug, along with talking to a bunch of older guys at the barbershop that are going bald. Doug realizes that no matter what he looks like, he's still the same person and that he'll be missing out on life events if he chooses to hide away because of his insecurities. The episode ends with Doug going to the water park with his friends and having the time of his life. Disaster strikes Doug's world and Doug's friend's friend. Doug forces Skeeter to go on a ride with BB in order for him to have time alone with Patti. Doug doesn't think anything of it, but he notices that after that day, Skeeter has been spending a lot less time with him. At first, Doug assumes that Skeeter is mad at him for forcing him to ride with BB, but he soon sees the two kissing in public. Doug talks to Patti about it, who claims that it's obvious that they've been seeing each other and Doug just didn't realize because he's a boy. Doug is absolutely flabbergasted. He confronts Skeeter at the ice cream shop later that evening. It's here that Doug gets the full story of how during the ride, Skeeter and BB suddenly fell head over heels in love with each other. Doug tries to process this information, but it's hard when Skeeter continues to neglect their friendship over his relationship. Doug eventually gets fed up, and instead of having a calm conversation about the relationship and his time priorities, he makes fun of their relationship instead. Skeeter walks out on Doug, with them both over the friendship in general. Doug continues to try and thwart the relationship, even pretending to be a fortune teller at the amusement park to further escalate things, but nothing works. Doug comes to the conclusion that Skeeter's happiness matters more than his selfish feelings about their time together, and decides to apologize to him. During his apology, Skeeter drops the bomb that he and BB broke up due to Skeeter's continuous honking noises. The episode ends with the two friends back to their usual dynamics, happy together once again. Warning, mentioning of eating disorders. Probably one of the funniest titles in regards to the seriousness to this episode, Doug's chubby buddy dives into the weight expectations of women and what that may mean for Patti. It all begins with Patti and her friends watching a commercial on a waist slimming program. At first, Patti is unamused, but after feeling fat, she and her girlfriends decide to go on a diet. Patti takes it the most seriously though, waking up early to run and eating next to nothing. She even begins turning down water in fear that she might just retain the weight of it. At first, she seems happier, doing well in her races, but after about 2 days of barely eating, Patti begins to feel dizzy. Doug expresses his concerns, but she refuses to listen. On her big racing day, she ends up fainting after her long jump due to her not eating anything. One of the adults that was watching from the crowd asks Patti if she had been eating, to which she responds honestly, explaining that she thought that it would increase her speed and make her more athletic. Patti then learns that not eating does the opposite. It actually causes people's bodies to eat itself, starting with the muscles and then attacking organs in order to find the energy that it needs to continue moving. Patti retains this powerful information and moves forward with her life, feeling much more content with her eating habits. The episode ends with her and Doug eating at the ice cream restaurant, about to dig in on some delicious food. The love for BB's family is faltering, and they're unsure what to do about it. After BB's father talks to their publicist, they come to the conclusion that they should have Thanksgiving at a regular civilian household in order for them to appear more homey and welcoming. The funnies are randomly selected and they basically have no choice but to say yes. At first, it's kind of exciting for them with all of the reporters and photos and all of that jazz, but it soon becomes overwhelming and annoying. Doug is weirded out by all of the attention and decides to take a visit to Patti's house for a sense of normalcy and friendship, but she gives him the cold shoulder. Doug insists that he doesn't understand why she's so upset, to which she explains that she was uninvited by the messengers in Doug's house. Doug goes to the Thanksgiving Day parade, feeling defeated and sad about their unfortunately Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, atop the float, BB begs her father to let them have Thanksgiving alone, given that the entire town is rooting for their float and that they don't have anything to prove to anybody anymore. Her father reluctantly agrees, freeing the funnies from their clutches. Upon returning home, Doug and his family ponder what they should do with all the leftover food that they're now housing, so they decide to invite the whole town over for a huge celebration. Patti makes up with Doug and all is well. Doug decides that he's ready to finally show Patti how he feels in Doug's midnight kiss. In order to do so, he plans on kissing her at this New Year's party at BB's mansion. In order to prepare for the mystical event, he decides to practice kissing on some balloons and doing his own research. He does so up until the time of the party, but when he goes to try and make a move, he notices that Patti is missing. Apparently, Guy took her away, probably in hopes to kiss her as well. Doug goes outside to mourn the loss of his chances with Patti, but is happily surprised when she comes outside as well. She's visibly distraught, and upon asking her what happened, she tells him about Guy trying to kiss her. She emphasizes that she's not ready for that type of stuff in her life, and that she's happy to be friends with Doug since she doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff whenever she's around him. Doug picks up on the hint and decides to play it cool, telling her that he isn't looking for that type of stuff either. Cut to every time he's practiced kissing objects. The episode ends with the two of them planning on throwing their own New Year's Eve celebration next year. The worst unimaginable thing is proposed to the students of Bluffington in this next episode, Doug and the Bluffington 5. School uniforms. Yep, you heard me. Their principal is wanting there to be school uniforms, and it seems as though the students don't get a say in it. Sally, the president of the debate team, thinks otherwise and immediately begins a petition to make sure the uniforms never get passed into their rules. Patti becomes a major part of this revolution and even becomes the face of it. She begins to control all of the meetings and makes everything about herself while claiming that she's only thinking of everyone else at the same time. Eventually, Sally quits after Patti won't let her be the one to debate against the school principal. Because of this, Patti does some self-reflection, and after the principal is allowed to talk about uniforms, she allows Skeeter of all people to share his opinion. Apparently, Skeeter was for uniforms since it allows him to never think about what he wants to wear whenever he wakes up in the morning. Because of his opinion, the rest of the school begins to think more thoughtfully about the uniforms as well. In the end, the uniforms aren't required or created due to the school board having differing opinions on what they should look like. Financial troubles plague the city of Bluffington. In this next episode, BB goes broke. Doug's friend Fentruck shares his qualms with his friends about his homeland Yakistonia after not being able to afford to play an arcade game. Doug, Patti, and Skeeter share their worry for their friend after noticing his lack of funds, to which Fentruck explains that in order to gain more financial gain, he plans on growing and selling his own snooze gaffle, a staple crop in Yakistonia and one of Fentruck's favorite delicacies. He rushes off to begin harvesting in the middle of their hangout sesh. Worried for their friend, the three decide to seek out BB in hopes that she can financially help Fentruck out. That way, he doesn't have to move back in with his parents due to them not being able to afford him to stay in Bluffington much longer. BB ignores their requests for a favor though, and instead invites them to a huge party that will be taking place the following night. The friends hesitantly agree, still wondering if BB may be able to help Fentruck out. Upon returning back to the Bluffing household, BB finds that everything in her mansion has been wrapped up or taken away. She sadly asks her father if all of their furniture is getting cleaned. Wishful thinking, girly, but that's okay. Her father explains that they've run very low on money due to a failed investment, so they're going to be downgrading houses and will need to be more mindful with their money. You might as well have shot BB in the head. Scared and confused, BB confides in her friends, which is where she realizes that her life has given her so much privilege she doesn't even know how to cut tomatoes for a sandwich. Okay, Kourtney Kardashian. BB continues to complain about her lack of money up until Fentruck begins explaining to her that the most important pleasures of life come from simple items and those closest to you, not necessarily the amount of money that you possess. He offers BB one of his snooze gaffles, which she immediately enjoys. The episode ends with BB becoming rich again as her father invested in Fentruck's snooze gaffle, making them a luxury food item and selling them for much more money than they're worth, allowing Fentruck to become financially stable again as well. Doug and Skeeter get themselves in a sticky situation in Doug's adventures online. It begins with Phil buying the Funnies their very own home computer. The boys excitedly begin exploring the internet, finding themselves in the Beats chat room, the boys' favorite band. It's here that they agree to meet up with somebody in order to trade albums with them, since the user wouldn't allow them to buy it with real money online. They agree to meet up in a park. But while they're waiting to meet the stranger, they notice something smelling burnt. They find the trash can nearby is on fire. The boys quickly rush to the scene and put out the flames, but when they turn around, they notice that all of their records are gone. That night, they go online to see if there are any record stores nearby, as they need at least one record back from their pile, a one-of-a-kind record that only Doug's father owns. Coincidentally, it is being sold at Funny's record shop downtown. The boys enter the shop and are rudely greeted by Funny, the owner and cashier at the store. The boys search for the record and find not only the one they were looking for, but also all of the records that were stolen from them earlier that day. The boys confront Funny, telling him that they believe all of their records were stolen and given to Funny earlier that day. Funny immediately gets defensive, saying that he runs an honest store and he wouldn't do business with anyone that seems suspicious. During his rant, he basically tells on himself, saying that he would never associate with someone from a Beats online chat room. The boys call out for help, knowing that Mr. Funny is the culprit. Thankfully, the mayor was in the store at the same time and called the cops as there's no valid selling license on display in his store. All of the records were returned to the boys, and it was also revealed that over half of the records inside of the store in general were stolen from other people throughout the years. The episode ends with the boys happy that they were able to get to the bottom of it, but also getting a long lecture from Phil about not talking to strangers online anymore, as it can be dangerous and lead to bad situations. Doug's old best friend, Bobby Bondingo, is moving to Bluffington in this next episode, Doug's best buddy. But he's nothing like how Doug remembers him from when they were kids. At first, Doug is excited to show Bobby around and introduce him to all of his friends, but Bobby quickly embarrasses Doug in front of everyone. First, he acts weird and makes offensive jokes to the guys in Doug's class, and then he weirdly tries to go into the women's restroom. Patti and BB are unimpressed, and Skeeter's first impression wasn't the best either. He even throws his garbage onto the ground, which disgusts Doug as he should be recycling instead. All bets are off after Bobby ruins Doug and his friend's trip to the amusement park. Doug breaks their lifelong bond pact that they made when they were children, telling Bobby to stop associating with him so he can get his real friends back, who are equally as disturbed by Bobby's behavior. After talking with his parents, Doug feels a bit better about his decision to ditch Bobby, but when Bobby doesn't show up to school, Doug begins to panic a bit. He asks around, and when he finds that he skipped school completely, he heads out to find him. Assuming he would be at the comic store, Doug finds him easily. Doug ends up chatting with Bobby, saying that he doesn't want their friendship to end, and the only way for that to happen is Bobby acting less like, well, the bad version of himself. Doug lectures Bobby on all of his good qualities and that he doesn't have to act like a clown all the time in order for people to like him. The episode ends with Bobby and Doug becoming friends again, and all of Doug's friends slowly becoming accustomed to all that Bobby has to offer. Lots of changes are coming to Bluffington as the show comes close to a conclusion. One of which is Doug's voice continuing to crack, which just makes him a bit more awkward throughout the episode. The main prompt of Doug's marriage madness is Patty's father getting married. Patty asks Doug to hold onto the rings there since her flower girl dress doesn't have pockets, but Doug somehow loses the ring. He goes around town attempting to find it and he never does. The day of the wedding, Doug tells Patty about his mistake, but she's too focused on the wedding to really care, claiming that they'll just figure it out later as there's no time to dwell on it. During the ceremony, the pastor faints, commotion erupts, and the crowd begins to become rowdy. Doug goes up to the podium and begins giving a speech in order for everyone to listen and continue the ceremony. Doug ends up being the one to give them their vows, and right in time, the ring happens to fall out of Doug's shoe. Patty's father is able to marry, and all is well. The episode ends with Patty asking Doug out on their very first date. Doug happily accepts her invitation. Meanwhile, Dirtbike says her first word, or makes her first sound more like. Oh, and Doug gets to the last page of his journal. Judy goes off to Vol University, an uptight arts college. Since she's obsessed with acting, naturally she auditions for a theater role. But the judges think her performance is so bad that they cut her performance short. She goes back to her room to confide in Doug, only for her to be called back out to the judges. Apparently, when she had turned in some of her portfolios, she had accidentally turned in one of Doug's drawings. They were so impressed by it that they decided to admit her into the college, but only if she's able to draw more for them. Panicked, she runs back to Doug so that he can draw something for her instead. Thoroughly impressing the judges, Judy is ecstatic that she's able to stay in the college for longer, but Doug is feeling down. After seeing Judy's goals and how committed she is to her craft, he starts feeling inadequate and lesser than. Upon seeing how down he is, Judy decides to put her big girl pants on and confess. She ushers Doug to the judges and tells them the truth. All of it was Doug. He's the talented one when it comes to art, not her. The judges are shocked that she's just now telling them the truth, and they're still incredibly impressed with Doug's ability. Doug, realizing what's been going on this whole time, decides to draw 3 lines on a paper. He shows the drawings to the judges, proving to them that his drawings are worth nothing if he isn't given the time to finish them. By saying all of this, he convinces them to give Judy a second chance in her acting performance, allowing her this time to finish her production. With a twist at the end, the judges are actually impressed, happy with Judy for sticking up for herself and Doug in telling the truth. They readmit her into the college program, and Doug leaves the college knowing exactly what he wants to do for the rest of his life, pursue his passions, and never stop drawing. Taking place before Patty's father got married, Patty's dad dilemma shows just how upset Patty was when she first found out that her father had found another love. Patty was convinced that her father was seeing someone. She even went to the lengths of spying on him throughout his day to see exactly who it was. Upon noticing that her father truly was on a date, Patty becomes extremely distraught. She visits her mother's grave crying, wondering how her father could ever move on. He finds her there and the two have a long chat. Her father explains that while he may be seeing someone else, that doesn't mean that Patty's mother is being replaced. It only means that he's falling in love again. Her mother will always have a special place in his heart and nothing could ever take that away. Patty begins to understand and the two hug it out, happy that her fears are squashed and her relationship with her father is mended back together. Doug's first movie begins with Doug and Skeeter going on their own little adventure at the lake. It's here that they notice a strange creature lurking in the dark. At first, the boys run away in fear, but after mentally and physically preparing themselves, they head back to the lake in order to figure out exactly what lies in store for them. It's here that they meet a monster, a bluish, tall monster that appears to be mostly sentient. The two name him Herman and immediately take him to the mayor, Mrs. Dink, in order to get her opinion on it, as the monster seems to be a direct consequence of the pollution that is continuously pumped through the lake by Bill Bluff, BB's father. She confirms the boys' suspicion but tells them to keep quiet about the monster because the second Bill gets wind of what was created by his own doing, he'll shut the story down immediately. The boys agree, but that doesn't last long. After all the commotion with the monster, Doug forgot about his special date with Patty at their favorite ice cream shop. Doug tries to get there as fast as possible, but is still too late as Patty is nowhere to be found upon his arrival. After asking around, he's told that while Patty was originally there, she left with some guy. Doug leaves in pursuit of her and finds her with Guy, the dude whose name is Guy, getting ready for the school dance. He apologizes to Patty and attempts to explain himself, and it works for her. However, Guy isn't too convinced. He calls Doug a liar and antagonizes him until he snaps. Doug uncovers the monster that he and Skeeter found, going in depth trying to explain why he bailed on Patty. Guy is still unconvinced until Doug leaves and accidentally drops a photo of the monster on his way out of the school. Guy, who's trying to humiliate Doug in order to better his chances with Patty, decides to call Bill Bluff in order to further thwart Doug's claims. The next morning, Mrs. Dink is excited to tell the boys that the local TV station has agreed to hear out their story so that they can share their information with the town before Bill shuts it down. Skeeter decides to go out to talk to them, but something seems off. The report was supposed to be live, but Mrs. Dink can't seem to find it anywhere online. Doug goes outside to investigate. While doing so, he trips on one of the camera wires. Instead of it just cutting power to the camera weirdly begins to deflate. None of the cameras are real, and all of the people there are fake news reporters hired by Bill to get the boys and Mrs. Dink off of his back while he figures out a way to get rid of the monster story for good. Doug gets caught behind the cameras, and when he's asked to speak on the monster, he decides to lie and tell them all that they must have been mistaken and there's not actually any sort of monster. Patti is mortified by this, as it would mean that Doug lied to her face when explaining why he stood her up. Patti angrily walks away with Guy, leaving Doug to sadly reflect on the day's actions. Doug and Skeeter attempt to return the monster to the lake on the night of their school dance, but they find that the lake is boiling and actively being pumped with sludge. Bill finds them there and starts going in on them, threatening that he will keep them in middle school forever, etc. Thankfully, Bill's rant is interrupted by BB, the rest of their classmates, and Mrs. Dink. BB reprimands her father, basically treating him like a child and instructing him that if he wants to talk to Doug and Skeeter, that he can talk to her first to get the message across. Mrs. Bluffington threatens Bill, telling him that he's going to need to get the pollution out of the lake before she files a suit with the federal government, which would inevitably bankrupt him. After all is said and done, Doug still has one thing to do: apologize to poor Patti. She's annoyed with him still, but quickly forgives him when the monster comes out of the lake, proving that he's real and confirming that everything Doug has been saying has been the truth. The movie ends with Patti and Doug, along with all of their other classmates, dancing and having a good time. And with that, we come to the end of Doug. I hope you all enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane with us. Do you wish they kept this series going? Let me know in the comments. Catch ya in the next one.